if I could, I think a lot of us this weekend are thinking of the family of James Foley. And I'm sure other speakers, it sounds by the way like you've had a wonderful roster of speakers, have talked about Jim. It was not my pleasure, I'm afraid, to know him. I talked a little bit about this morning on our show. My Uncle Sheldon, for example, and the family could never understand why I would go off and cover wars. Uncle Sheldon had made 5 amphibious landings with U.S. Marines in the South Pacific during World War II. But as he would point out, he was drafted. And the whole idea of volunteering for that kind of life is something that for reasons I absolutely respect, my uncle found a little bit curious. And I also tried to own up to the fact this morning that those of us who have been war correspondents and have covered wars, part of our incentive is professional. It absolutely puts a certain stamp on your career. I've certainly been a very different figure in journalism because I've done that, and that's part of why we do it too. But everything that I have learned about Jim Foley suggests that he was doing this very dangerous work for very good reasons, which is to shine light into forbidding, often unseen, often unheard of parts of the world where the suffering is greatest, where they need that light the most. And I hope we hold him in our hearts too. Let me try and clear something up at the very first. I am not, as it happens, a gay man. But I know for millions of people I play one on the radio. I love Broadway, ballet, Bloomingdale's, white wine, NPR, and Judy. My own wife says, darling, lavender really is your color. A couple years ago, I was in our offices, and I happened to overhear the new interns being given a tour of our office area. And of course, we get, as I'm sure a lot of you folks here do, just absolutely scads of books and press material, and they were looking for some guidance on what they bring to me. And the person showing them around said, well, you know, anything with a personal note, all the PR people learn how to try and, fabricate the appearance of a personal note, and went on and on. And she said, oh, you know, Scott, he likes modern fiction, anything to do with Chicago, Broadway, ballet, West End, Judy Garland, Stephen Sondheim, and Sir Noel Coward. And then she paused and said, come to think of it, I guess you could say he's culturally gay. Came into the office one morning and yet another biography of Judy Garland had come out. And there were like 6 or 8 copies piled up right in front of my office. And I could see people peering over their shoulders to see what my reaction would be. Our staff are sneaking peeks, and a wonderful guy who has been a part of this group in the past, named Sean Collins, has been producing our show. Proud gay man, and Sean turned around and said, you know, you get more gay shit around here than I do. We have made a lot of progress in this country, and I am going to try not to forget that in the remarks I have tonight. And I think some of that progress might be exemplified by the fact that I have no doubt there are some married couples here tonight. But I think events, yes. But I think events in Ferguson, and for that matter, the extraordinary homicide rate on the south side of this, my beloved city, reminds us that there's much more to be done on so many frontiers of equality. I sometimes tell people that if they think there's no longer anti-Semitism or anti-gay prejudice, they ought to get a look at my email and sometimes my Twitter stream. Because if somebody unbalanced by hate, if somebody who is unbalanced by hate doesn't like you, it doesn't take them 30 seconds to decide you're either Jewish or gay or some happy combination of both. I came home from our studio one Saturday afternoon. There was a box at our desk of our apartment building, very heavy box, and it had a distinct smell. So I popped the top slightly, and inside there was a severed pig's head. As I said to the police when they were called, I had no idea it was luau night. The FBI was called in. It wasn't very difficult to determine who had left the box because as terrorists go, these guys were not out of a Jean Le Carré novel. They apparently had driven up to the building in a identifiable car with the conspicuous Pennsylvania state plates. And the FBI told us that they were 3 members of a group of maybe 8 people who had objected to something I said in support of gays. Now, I try not to be too proud about this because these are the kinds of guys who also get messages on their fillings. But of course, you don't want to dismiss the incident just as a joke because as you can appreciate, especially with children, you worry about what some people are capable of. So my wife were in bed that night reviewing the events of the night. My wife, who some of you know, is French. She said, "A bloody pig's head. What the hell is a bloody pig's head supposed to mean?" I made the inevitable jokes about, I'm sorry we didn't prepare it, darling. You know the French, they'll eat anything. I said to my wife, pig's head, maybe it's anti-Semitic. She said, well, the FBI said that it's anti-gay. And I said, maybe it's both. And my wife said, bloody hell. If you're going to be a hateful bigot, shouldn't you at least be clear about it? I also want to clear something else up. There's a story I've dined out on for years. This organization used to have notebooks, reporters' notebooks, that said, we're here, we're queer, we're unidentified. Look, I'm from public broadcasting, and I want to tell you, this improves on any damn coffee mug, tote bag, any other tchotchke I've ever seen. We're here, we're queer, we're unidentified. People who run this organization were kind enough to give me a whole crate one day. I think I followed a contribution. I have carried these notebooks all over the world. And you kind of cease to remember what's on the front. So I was covering the war in Afghanistan. We were in the Gardez Mountains, and there was a battle going on, and we were with the fearsome Pashtun warlord Pachakan, whose name sometimes still comes up in the news, and not because he's running a social services center. And there was a prisoner exchange between Pachakan's warriors and the Taliban, and the warlord strode over to me because I was taking notes in the notebook, and he said, "We need paper to write down the names." Without thinking, I gave him my notebook. We're unidentified. I mean, he liked the notebook. He began to use it as a swagger stick. The Taliban prisoners are over here, I'm over there. It came time to leave. And I don't pretend to be an expert in Pashtun culture, but I don't think you asked the warlord for your notebook back. So as we were leaving, the fearsome warlord, Pachakan, was waving goodbye with the notebook. We're here, we're queer, we're unidentified. And we got back to Afghanistan, got back to Kabul, and like 3 or 4 days later, we learned that the Royal Marines had conducted a sweeps operation with Pachakan and his warriors. And I have always imagined the Royal Marines walking into the warlord's yurt, seeing this notebook on his carpeted floor, and saying, it's not really what we expected at all. Now, I'm particularly glad that we are meeting in Chicago, which is, I think a lot of you know, is my hometown. I'm going to talk a little bit about my mother, if that's all right. Her death last year got a lot of attention. I tweeted, as it turned to be the scene of her death, her bedside in the intensive care unit here at Northwestern Hospital. Both my mother and my father worked in this hotel. My mother was a showgirl, she was a hostess, she worked in I think it was the Empire Room and the Imperial Room. There were both places here. My father was a comedian, worked the Empire Room. I count myself as being very blessed to have had a distinct and interesting parentage and childhood. And if you don't mind, I want to read a section from my forthcoming book about my week with my mother, a lot of it on my mother, because I think it's instructive to the rest of what I'm going to have to say here. I apologize in advance, even here, for some of the language. I hope that picks up your ears, puts up your ears. I was blessed to grow up with a lot of people who were uncles and aunties who worked in nightclubs up and down Rush Street, who worked retail up and down Michigan Avenue. Creative people. This is from the book until an editor strikes it out. There are editors here tonight, aren't there? By the way, I think a lot of you have probably taken the ASL challenge. You know, the Lou Gehrig's disease ice bucket challenge. When I had to take it this week, when we had to decide who was going to pour the ice water on me, our editors decided it had to be them. So here's a section from the book. I'm recollecting some of my uncles. Gene, Jim, Blair, Leo, so many of my uncles had come to Chicago from one of Sandberg's little soft cities outside of Chicago, as he often remarked, I don't talk to my family, or I haven't seen my mother or father in years. My inklings grew as I grew older until one morning I just asked Gene, Jim, and the rest, are they fruits? I cringe now to recall that I used that word. What is it that politicians say when caught by some old boorishness? I was a man of my time and place. I was a 13-year-old kid looking for a chance to be a little shocking. My mother sat down with me at the kitchen table. Do you mean homosexuals? Yes, I guess I told her. I guess I don't really know, she said. Perhaps so. She mentioned some of their hometowns, places like Rockford, Bettendorf, and St. Joseph's, and said they moved to Chicago because they didn't fit into those small towns. People from all over the world find a place here, but their families may not understand the way they are. Well, we're not their family, but we can give them a drink and a good meal and a place to laugh. We can care about them. You know, dear, she said, if you really want to do something creative, you'll meet a lot of people like that. But how do they know about real life, I asked, when they're different? I remember my mother taking a long pause and searching over and reaching over for my rye toast. Do you think they really are different? My mother matched my pause and went on. They sure know about love. They know about loneliness. They know how to be funny. Maybe all creative people are a little different, but being a little bit of an outsider helps you see things that other people may miss. That's why so many artists are outsiders, you know, one way or another. I remember how my mother pushed back from the table. She was disappointed, irritated, and had to get ready for work. I think we're pretty lucky to know them, she called back from the hallway. Don't you? I went to my first gay rights march in this city when I was still a student in the early 1970s. 2, 4, 6, 8, gay is just as good as straight. 3, 5, 7, 9, lesbians are mighty fine. Those slogans, words I'm deeply believe still. But those chants sound like, you know, a little bit, no more edgy than the theme from the Brady Bunch theme song at this point, don't they? Our agenda then was maddeningly undetailed. Equal rights regardless of sexual orientation. Had you told me then one day that would include the right to same-sex marriage, it didn't occur to me. I don't think it occurred to most of us. There is a lot to be done, but if you ever despair about the possibility of change, remember that in the space of little more than a generation, we have gone from gays feeling they have to live cloistered, concealed, closeted, secret lives, to being the featured couple in the vows section of the New York Times. My favorite English teacher in high school, and not just my favorite English teacher, was a wonderful guy named Richard Saha, English teacher, also presided over the Senn High School Literary Supplement, a publication not to be confused with the Times Literary Supplement. He was a very fierce, funny man. left us in the 1980s, taken from us, one of the first people I think in my own life I knew to be taken by the scourge of age. Had a huge moving funeral. I will never forget the shoulders of the football players shuddering as they remembered Mr. Sahai. Mr. Sahai had to live a concealed life. It was absolutely illegal to be gay and to teach in the Chicago public schools. In 2009, Mayor Daley appointed a proud gay man, Ron Huberman, happens to be a friend of mine, to be the head of the Chicago public schools. And no one in the Chicago City Council, which is never to be confused with the British House of Lords, no one in the Chicago City Council, which is often home to some of the most boorish remarks in the world, no one in the Chicago City Council said that there was anything wrong with this proud gay man living in partnership, now married to his husband Darren, and father of two. Couldn't be head of the Chicago public schools. Never think that the world doesn't turn, because it does. Our challenge is to turn it in a way that points towards kindness and goodness and liberty and equality and the blessings of family and of friendship. I can't believe I've gone this far and not talked about our children. Usually takes me 45 seconds, but this occurred to me just a couple of years ago. We went to the Big Apple Circus. Our children are growing up with two godfathers who were a same-sex couple, Marcus and Jose. We went to the Big Apple Circus and we went to a restaurant that will never be confused with a four-star place for the dinner afterwards. And we were looking up at the television monitor and there was an Alabama-Mississippi game, Alabama-Mississippi football game going on. And I think it was Mississippi that won the game because the jerseys were red. And two guys who figured it into it were there standing on the sidelines being interviewed and their arms around each other. And our then 8-year-old daughter turned to me and said, maybe they'll get married someday. Yeah, she's pretty damn cute, isn't she? And my wife and I said, yeah, maybe they will. I've come here tonight because it's important to me to not just lend whatever small business I can to try and make it possible for gays and lesbians and transgender people to become journalists. I want to encourage gays and lesbians and transgender people to come into this tent and to make journalism better, richer, sharper, more sensitive and interesting. I want to be blunt about this to the point of indiscreet. Journalism is at its best when it comes from the eye of the outsider. This was not journalism, always a profession that brought bright young people into the tent, that bright young people competed to enter, people that were rife with master's degrees from eminent schools and fellowships and scholarships and respectability, not to mention stylish dressers. Reporting was once considered a job for those who were rumpled and cranky. I'm not getting personal, okay? People who are rumpled and cranky. Problem children, if you please. Clowns, geeks, nerds, putzes. And a lot of reporters were outcasts and dropouts, or people who felt that society had dropped them at one point. Listen to some of the most honored names from the roll call of journalism, and it pleases me that a lot of them began in Chicago. Ben Heck, Carl Sandburg, Ring Lardner, Mike Royko, Jimmy Breslin, Joe Alsop, Mary McRory, Dan Shore, Wendell Smith, Bob Maynard, Leroy Aarons, my friend Gail Schister, Randy Schultz. Ethnics, Catholics, Jews, African Americans, women, and gays. And as we know now, many people who were. I am a Chicago journalist, and I tend to believe, and I think the best definition of journalism ever provided by Finley Peter Dunn's great character, Mr. Dooley, Southside Farm. He wrote columns about it, where he said the job of journalism is to afflict the comfortable and to comfort the afflicted. Those people who have made known what it's like to have been demeaned and misunderstood and mocked and dismissed can bring special insight, perception, and impetus to journalism. And it's important to me to be here tonight to say that's why we need to encourage gays in journalism, to bring that eye, to bring their experience into our national consciousness. We will have a better industry, we'll have a better country. when that's done. I would like to leave you with some words that have become important to me over the years. E.M. Forster, the great writer, during what turned out to be a period well, what period isn't a period of great turmoil in the world, wrote an essay called What I Believe. And E.M. Forster wrote, "I believe in aristocracy, not an aristocracy of power based upon rank and influence, but an aristocracy of the sensitive, the considerate, and the plucky. Its members are to be found in all nations and classes and all through the ages, and there is a secret understanding between them when they meet. They represent the true human tradition, the one permanent victory of our queer race over cruelty and chaos. Thousands of them perish in obscurity of fewer great names. They are sensitive for others as well as for themselves. They are considerate without being fussy. Their pluck is not swankiness, but the power to endure. And they can take a joke." That last line is especially important. Thank you for your invitation. It's good to be back here. Thank you for letting me be here tonight with my brothers and my sisters.